Good afternoon. My name is Monica Vavilala, and it gives me great pleasure to welcome you to the panel hosted by the Association of University Anesthesiologists at its annual meeting. This panel was conceived by folks in this group who came together to think about how we could have a conversation regarding growing anesthesiology research, a topic that is near and dear to the hearts of many in this society. We felt that we should talk about how do we grow our junior investigators, how do we talk about the variety of different pathways there are towards career development, and finally independent funding. And as we discussed the program specifics, we realized that instead of us talking about theoretical frameworks for what should and should not work, that we should have more of a community conversation around our own pathways and then open it up to discussion so we can learn from one another in the spirit of a true peer learning network. So with that, it gives me a great pleasure to welcome you again. And I'm joined by Dr. Meredith Adams from Wake Forest University, Dr. Karsten Bartels from the University of Nebraska, Dr. Andrea Chadwick from the University of Kansas, and Dr. Vivian Tofik from Stanford University. We were intentional about issues of making sure that our perspectives represented the variety and heterogeneity of perspectives that exist among our trainees and junior faculty, and therefore trying to bring diversity to our conversation. Next slide, please. Collectively, we do not have any conflicts of interest to disclose, and we will not be discussing off-label or investigational use agents. So as I mentioned, I'm at the University of Washington, having had unique experiences of completing two residencies, the first in pediatrics and the second in anesthesiology, and having started my career as a clinician with no expectations of staying in academic medicine. And by happenstance, meeting a senior faculty member in the hallway who said, hey, you need to think about a K-23. What a great opportunity for you to learn and engage yourself in topics of conversation that seem to inspire you. That then led to a switch in career pathways to becoming a clinician educator, and then my first R01, which then sort of fully led to the transformation into a clinician scientist. And this journey has been met with challenges, including myself not knowing exactly which direction I was going to take, struggles with funding. In 1 year, I think I applied for 11 grants to get one, and challenges with securing sponsorship towards really helping achieve what I would have at that time liked to have thought about my full potential. But these trajectories and navigations have been really wonderful when you look back at it. I'm at the University of Washington. I direct an interdisciplinary research center and where the focus is on translational science, interdisciplinary work, and improving public health. And with that, I'd like to take this opportunity to ask Dr. Meredith Adams to introduce herself.
Thank you for the introduction, Monica. So I'm Meredith Adams. I'm a clinician scientist that is at Wake Forest. My background, again, kind of mirroring Monica, was not a planned, sort of transition to research. I had planned a clinical pathway all through residency. There was research happening where I was in residency at Johns Hopkins, but really it was my last year of training where I had the opportunity to go to the head of the International Pain Society's lab for 2 weeks in Denmark. And then I think the combination of baked goods and interesting science conversations was what really pulled me through it. And so I've worked, through all the different challenges to really bring that love of baked goods and good scientific conversations to my science and sort of build towards that. I've taken a turn in terms of my science in that I worked my way through with Masters of Clinical Translational Science and did a lot of pain education service work and also research. And then that led me to the interesting world of clinical informatics. And that's brought me to, data coordination and COVID data and all the interesting things that I get to do now. But there were a lot of no's on the way. I think that I don't think I have them all listed down here, because there definitely were periods of time where there was 6 or 7 in a year to try and get the one that worked. But I've been very fortunate. And I'll pass along to my next colleague here, Dr. Bartels.
Hi, thank you, Meredith. My name is Karsten Bartels. I'm originally from Germany. I did residency at MGH, and then I did 3 fellowships in pain, cardiac anesthesia, and critical care at Hopkins and Duke. I was very disoriented. And then I took my first long-term faculty position in Colorado, and just recently took a position as vice chair of research here in Nebraska. I love my job, and I really love my job. And I think one reason I love it so much is because I am able to do research, and in that way, I'm able to do what I want. It's very much self-directed. I really like that. It's not without challenge, like many know, and the folks who just talked in front of me also said. I have had very big challenges with funding, especially getting started. As you can see down there below, I had probably 15 grants not funded, including all the fair mechanisms. But I was, it was different at NIH and now recently at HRQ for me. And another big challenge I had was when I came to Colorado, I was going to do basic science. But the lab where I worked essentially disappeared just a few months after I got there. So I had to do my own thing. And that's what I've been doing ever since. And I really encourage people to do their own thing. And with that, I will pass it on to Viv.
Great, thank you. And thanks for having me on the panel. So I guess I'm representing the quote traditional path, although here I'm the minority. So it's kind of fun to be the only MD PhD in the group. And I think that's just the amazing thing about this panel, is it really just shows there's so many different pathways to being a physician scientist in anesthesiology. So my own path started at Dartmouth, where I did my PhD in the basic science of pain with Joyce DeLeo, who is just a wonderful mentor and sponsor and continues to be so for me. And so I think that's one key point we'll probably come back to, is the importance of mentorship. I did my anesthesiology residency here at Stanford in our residency research track, or the PSTP as we call them now, and then did 2 postdocs here at Stanford, different investigators, Dr. Greg Scher and Dr. David Clark. And then I went back and I only completed 1 clinical fellowship, so I'm not quite up to the standard of Dr. Bartels. I did my fellowship in pain medicine, and then started my own independent basic science research lab focused on the transition from acute to chronic pain, while also spending 1 day a week in our outpatient pain medicine clinic here at Stanford. I didn't get the memo that we were going to put our unfunded grants on the slide. Frankly, there wouldn't be enough space because there's so many unfunded grants that I've written over time. So you're really getting the highlights of the ones that did get funded, most of them on resubmission or re-resubmission. And I just want to echo what others have said, which is this dual career as a physician scientist in anesthesiology brings with it a lot of incredible opportunity for now mentoring others, sponsoring others, and really getting to push science forward in our field. So I'll pass off now to Dr. Chadwick.
Thank you. So my name is Andrea Chadwick. I am a Kansas girl. I'm in the Middle Coast here, enjoying the winter. So I did my MD here at University of Kansas and decided to go to the West Coast. So I did my anesthesiology residency at UCLA, and similar to Dr. Adams, I really thought I was just going to be a clinician. And in fact, when I did residency, I didn't even think I would do a pain fellowship. But I met a wonderful mentor at the University of California, Los Angeles by the name of Dr. Ferrante, and got involved in some research when I was in my residency, and it really piqued my interest. I enjoyed the concept of research. I enjoyed the area of research. And so Through talks with Dr. Ferrante at UCLA, I was actually able to secure and be kind of the guinea pig for their first combined fellowship and master's in clinical research program. So during my fellowship, it was actually half and half. So it turned my fellowship into 2 years. So I did my fellowship concurrent with the master's work. And at the end, I was all done with both, which was kind of nice. I went on to join faculty at UCLA, and I was able during my talks with them to secure about 40% clinical time and get some protected time for a certain amount of time to be able to build my research. And I was during that time that I made some wonderful connections and got funded with an internal pilot looking at chronic low back pain and patients getting intrathecal pumps for failed back surgery syndrome. Ultimately, though, you can take the girl out of Kansas and you got to bring her back. So I came back to Kansas just because this is my home, and really have enjoyed my time here. And just as others have said, I think going from a bigger name institution to a smaller institution where my department actually never had an NIH grant ever in the history of my department until I came. So it was kind of cool to be that person, but it also was met with a lot of hurdles. So I had many not funded grants, both NIH and internally. And something I'll talk a little bit about for me that's been kind of interesting is in a department with very little research going on, I didn't have much in the way of local mentorship or sponsorship. So something that's been really helpful for me is networking and meeting people at meetings and ultimately growing that network of mentorship and sponsorship throughout the United States and beyond. And that is, I think, ultimately what helped lead me to securing the first NIH grant at my institution. So that's what I do. Looking forward to the panel.
Thank you. So we're going to transition now to a conversation, and we're going to be asking 4 questions. In the interest of keeping our Q&A session to 20 minutes, we're going to spend 7 minutes per question. And we will begin with the first question that I will pose to Dr. Adams. This question will be answered by Dr. Adams, Dr. Bartels, and then Dr. Chadwick. So if we could start with Dr. Adams, what barriers did you face during your anesthesiology career development / research? And importantly, how did you overcome those barriers?
So, I mean, I think there are a couple of different themes, but one of the big ones was I had to sort of realize how much I didn't know and just be okay with that. And then really hunt down like the skills that I needed, because when I started, my writing was rubbish, and that's not helpful when you're trying to get funded and get published. And so, you know, I did a lot of different things to sort of strengthen that understanding. I did a master's, and it was actually a really helpful master's in clinical translational science. I'd started with the certificate program during fellowship and then really kind of built from there. But then even during my career development grant, I did a certificate program at the University of Chicago that was on medical editing to work on my writing, and really, I think, deconstructed patterns of how people wrote successful grants, how people wrote papers. I found the books, I studied them, and I followed the formula. And that's not to say that it always works and you have to throw the ideas in, but I think that was really one of those. And then I think a common theme that'll come up also is support. At my first faculty position, I did my master's while I was doing my working regular clinical and teaching stuff full time. And so it was sort of, you know, winding it around maternity leave, doing biostats exams, and all the things you do to sort of get there. And when I was in my second position at the Medical College of Wisconsin, when I was recruited there, it was really just, if you can get it, we'll support you. So just go for it, you know, go for everything, and we've got your back. And that was where I wrote my FAIR grant, and then I wrote my FAIR grant again. And then I shifted completely and had my K, and they were super supportive all along the way there.
Thank you so much. Sounds like you really invested in yourself, and that really made a difference. Dr. Bartels, how about you? What barriers did you face, and how did you importantly overcome them?
Yeah, so I mean, I want to pick up on learning how to write. You know, English is my second language, and I think that's really important, and don't shy away from low-level case reports and low-level journals when you start. I did residency at MGH and it was infused to me, I shouldn't say that, but it's Nature paper or nothing. And nothing is farther from the truth. You got to learn how to walk before you learn how to run. The other thing is, as I mentioned, I had to change course from basic science to clinical science and find a whole new set of mentoring. And I would just recommend do your homework when you look for people. And it's really easy to do that these days. NIH Reporter is a great tool to look for mentors, and then look for who the person is publishing with that you'll want to work with. Are they publishing with other young people? Reach out to somebody who's left the university and hear how it was. I think before you offer your work to somebody, make sure that it's going to be a mutually beneficial relationship. Thank you.
Thank you very much. How about you, Dr. Chadwick? You're on mute.
Classic. So I think this has been a great discussion. I agree that the barriers are there, and overcoming them. I actually like the challenges and the barriers. I feel like when you get to that good space, that having those barriers and getting through them really makes the end game that much sweeter. And I agree, like the writing and trying to find your space is really important. And for me, one of the biggest barriers was coming to an institution where I really didn't have there was no track record, no mentors that I could really kind of latch on to develop a line of inquiry. So for me, the biggest barrier was kind of just figuring out what space I wanted to carve, where I wanted to envision my line of inquiry going, and then trying to map out who in the country could help me with that. And for me, my main areas of research are fibromyalgia, centralized pain, and I really love chronic low back pain as well. So it just was happenstance that I met Chad Brummett at a meeting, the esteemed Chad Brummett, who introduced me to Dr. Dan Claw. And it was those series of meetings and, weekend email discussions that led me to the development of my K ideas. And then from there, it's just been kind of a natural progression and a continued, continuing to work on my themes and how do I progress them as I move, because I think we all also maybe need to pivot from where we've been doing research into something that becomes more interesting or more passionate. And so it's just understanding how that pathway goes out in front of you, and understanding that pivoting or moving or changing may be a barrier in and of itself. But again, if you've done it, you can do it again.
Thank you. Very inspiring stories. We'll move forward now to the second question, and we'll begin with Dr. Bartels. So how should we define success in a residency research track, and how do you think we can achieve that?
There's, I think, traditional metrics of success that we all well know, like, number of abstracts, papers, research funding, grants submitted. And I'm not arguing against those. Those are important in the long run. But I think we should also look at other important outcomes. For example, well-being. I just did a well-being survey in the group that I lead here, and I think it's in order to recruit and retain the best, and to actually have our residents, knock on our doors wanting to do research, we have to offer a package that really focuses on the whole person, and where we can show the advantage of working in our group, working in research, and that can be measured, that can be systematically assessed, and I think we should. And I think not every, a success is not necessarily only somebody who gets an R01. The success can be so different and incompletely captured by just using traditional metrics. So I think having intake and exit interviews and measuring, for example, mental health and well-being, those are metrics of success that we should really be interested in, because I think they're fundamental for long-term success. I want to offer a working environment where people want to love to work, and then I get the best people, and we will have the best work come out of our group as well.
Thank you. Dr. Chadwick, How about you? What do you think?
I totally agree with Dr. Bartels. Wellness and happiness. I mean, I think we talk about wellness, but just having that joy, that happiness in our lives is so important. And having that sense of being a groundwork, a foundation for building a person and building success is so important. And therefore, I think success can be academic, but it can come in different forms. And so I think this traditional model, I mean, I love that we had those timelines, those railroad tracks, as you called them, Monica, of how people progress and recognizing that that's different for everybody. And so to take and measure success based on this typical pathway, we know that that doesn't exist for everybody. And we've all had those barriers. So recognizing that success may be in an R01 for a certain person, perhaps it's a PCORI grant from another person, perhaps it's entrepreneurship and innovation in different types of forms, that recognizing, what type of output equals success, that's not the same for everybody. And I think that really helps foster that sense of wellness and happiness when you allow a person to succeed on their own terms and have that success be recognized for what it is.
Thank you. So Dr. Adams, a lot of emphasis in this conversation on well-being and mental health and long-term happiness and joy. How can we define that in a residency research track, bringing it back to the question?
I think that one of the aspects with this that it gets a little tricky is what everyone's version of happy, joy, and that autonomy that comes with it. But I think figuring out goals is a really good way to start and sort of measuring that and then seeing where you go with it in terms of, are you meeting those goals? I mean, I think we have our own, like, you have to hit these types of things. And then, if you don't meet them, things aren't going the way they're supposed to. But I really sort of feel like their goals and your goals, finding that middle place might be the way to assess it. What are your thoughts, Dr. Tawfik?
Yeah, thanks. I mean, I think I agree with everything that's been said, but I think just to address the question a little more, we're talking about residency research tracks. And so I do think that we have to keep in mind that these are separate tracks that have really been developed to foster researchers, academic physician scientists. And while we all had different paths to become anesthesiologists, physician scientists, ultimately researchers should be researching. And the metrics for research are, broadly defined grants and papers. And that's what most institutions use for metrics for appointment and promotions. And so while I think, of course, we want to have residency research tracks where we're flexible, where we re-evaluate if it's the right thing with each individual who's participating in the track. People's passions change over time, and I've seen that in mentoring my own residents through our research track. It should always be something that they're committed to and excited about. And if it's not, that's okay too. People change and maybe they go into entrepreneurship or into private practice or whatever it is. Everybody should follow their own passions and dreams. But I think if we're really thinking about metrics for success of a research track, we do have to think about it with limited resources and our goal to elevate the science in anesthesiology. I do think that the sort of traditional metrics, whether we agree with them or not, they're there, and that is what people use. So I think there's a lot of things here. We want wellness to be part of those tracks, and we want it to be an attractive profession because we all love it, and it's awesome to be a physician scientist, and we want to spread that joy. But I do think that when we're thinking about metrics, we do need to success as defined for anesthesiologists or physicians can be different for each individual. But again, I think we have to a little bit more focused if we're talking about research.
I wanted to chime in because I think I misunderstood the question a little bit after we started talking about wellness, which I love to talk about. But so Viv, you did a research residency track, correct? And I did a research focused fellowship. So I don't know about you, but I had certain milestones for kind of like completion along my master's while I was in my fellowship. And I found that having those milestones and like set dates really helped me with progressing along my research and making sure I was being held accountable to the things that were expected of me. Did you have similar things?
Yeah, I mean, we sort of, we know we have to apply for certain grants and, have mentorship teams and et cetera. So it's similar, and we're trying to formalize it more over time. But I think, like you said, it helps you know where you stand and how you're doing. And I'd say we don't do it to pressure our residents. We actually do it to guide our residents, and always with flexibility. And I think that's a key part here, is that being flexible to life events, being flexible to different pathways, to different approaches. Somebody wants to do a master's, somebody wants to do a clinical fellowship, whatever it is. We're very flexible, but we do have, sort of a scaffold, I guess, on which they can hang their experiences and their approach.
Kind of like a flexible accountability.
Thank you. So the mentor-mentee relationship doesn't always work. Let's talk a little bit about why and when do mentees run away from us? And Dr. Chadwick, do you want to start?
Yeah, I mean, I think that's a really great question. I think it's multifaceted. So, I left UCLA, which is a great academic institution, a very strong department of anesthesiology. But I think for me, it had really nothing to do with the mentorship I had there. It was just a general feeling of I was not getting mentorship in the area of research that I wanted. So obviously, coming to Kansas where there was no clinical pain research going on was totally the right call on my part, but hey, my family's here. So, for me, I think there's a variety of factors that might cause kind of either a breakdown of a mentoring relationship, or for the mentee to feel like perhaps they need to seek mentorship elsewhere. I mean, I think for me, there's chapters of books, right? You can have chapters of mentorship, and things that have ended my mentorship relationships in the past are just really generally like a lack of commitment. And it might be on both ends, but generally speaking, if the mentor that I had sought out was not making time for me, or if they would cancel meetings last minute after I'd prepared an agenda, and I was really looking for certain needs that weren't being met, that was a reason for me to run, I don't hate to say run, but, move on from that relationship. I also think just having clear expectations of mentorship. Sometimes you seek out mentorship, but maybe in the past, I haven't exactly said what I need from someone. I mean, because essentially when you're looking for mentorship or sponsorship, there are needs there. And if you don't verbalize those and have great open communication in the beginning, I think there may be hurt feelings or lost expectations on both ends that can lead to kind of a dissolution of that relationship. So I would say I'll turn it on to the next person. But those were generally some of the things I thought of when I had mentorship fails.
Great. Dr. Topic, how about you?
Yeah, I love everything you said there, Dr. Chadwick. So I think one thing I've really noticed, and something I really try to mention to my mentees now in my own lab, is that their success is my success. And I think the times that I've quote run has been when the mentor that I've had has not seen that. In other words, they consider there may be competition between us, or they're worried, or they think, that I'm not good enough or something. And they're very clear on that. And I had a prior mentor tell me that I'm not rigorous because I'm a doctor. So, if somebody's saying things like that to you, you're going to run, because you either start to believe it, you have imposter syndrome, or it's just not the right relationship, not the right place for you. So I think, I think that if we mentor people to be successful, because especially as anesthesiologists, we want to elevate the entire specialty to, be excited about science, and be excited about research, and be excited about moving the field forward. Then mentors should always see that, anyone in our field getting an R-level grant or PCORI or whatever it is, that's a success for all of us. And so I think that for me, it's been lack of alignment in terms of them being proud of what you do. I'm like ridiculously proud whenever somebody in my lab gets a grant or gets an award or anything. It's just, I'm beaming. And I think that's the type of thing that mentees want to see as they pick their mentors and why they stick around.
How about you, Meredith? How can we make sure our mentees stay with us and not run away?
Well, I think one of the things to realize is that it can be very intimidating for mentees to actually communicate what they know and they don't know. And I think a lot of times, especially when you're working with people that don't have a lot of experience, I think we've all made the mistake of asking somebody to do something, thinking they know how to do it. And then when it's like 3 months later, 6 months later, and we're sending the ping, you've been kind of ghosted. But it's really because I think a lot of times they don't know how to do the technical aspect of what we have to do. And I think people are afraid to ask because then the opportunity may not be there, right? If they say, I don't know how to do this, some mentors are cool with that and others are not. For myself, I'm always like, just tell me where we are so we can figure out where we need to start and where we need to go from there. I'm also really clear with like, I have this constraint. This is what I can do for you. This I'd love to show for you, but these are my boundaries. Like, this is where I can love you and me, and sort of keep the mentorship relationship where we need it to be. And I think, the other aspect of it is your mentor is not all of your mentoring needs are not going to come from one person. And so realizing that you need to distribute that load and those expectations, you may have the mentor that's like big vision person, and then you have the nitty gritty person, and then this scientific person, and all these different aspects. But I don't think that when you think of mentoring, I'll make Viv laugh again with the academic pyramid scheme, where there's like one person that's giving you all the instructions. I had to fit it in, and sort of telling you how to run your life. That doesn't really make for an independent scientist, right? But if we're trying to foster this independence, this creativity, and this drive, you've got to sort of take where they are and then sort of push them on a little bit. And maybe you'll be the person that keeps pushing them, and then maybe you're not. But I think it's just realizing that if we sort of share this joy and burden of mentoring, it's a way to sort of engage in a larger format.
Thank you. Great conversation. The last question for the panel today, before we do our live Q&A, is to talk about how can we increase academic anesthesiology output, not just at institutions that are historically well endowed, but across all of our academic programs. And I'll ask Vivian to talk about this first, being at Stanford. It's a premier institution. How has your perspective evolved, and how do you think about what institutions like Stanford can do to support institutions that really are interested in growing?
Yeah, thanks for the question. I mean, I think, it's tricky because I am here, and so I don't have as good a perspective on the challenges of being somewhere that is, where you're not surrounded by other K awardees and R level grantees, as I am lucky enough to be so here. That said, I think, through my work with some of you all on the Anesthesia Research Council, we are coming out with a position statement, a white paper discussing this topic in detail. And some of the things that we've thought about over the past year in looking at academic anesthesiology as a whole and the pipeline is that there's going to be multi-layers of recommendations, and they're going to come at the policy level, engaging with funders, engaging with individual departments, and then engaging with trainees. And so I think that there's probably sort of strategic goals with each of those. And so I imagine that it will allow us to increase the pipeline and really help some of these programs. So part of what we're talking about with that white paper is how do we bring that type of research infrastructure to other programs? How do we sort of formalize what Dr. Chadwick described, which was finding mentors at other institutions? How do we have mentors who can, sort of span with maybe program project grants or multi-center grants, so you can bring people in who don't necessarily have this infrastructure in their own institution, so things like that. So I think that there is definitely a role for that. I have a vision of making like a national physician scientist curriculum. I mean, now with Zoom, it's so much easier. And so things like that, like maybe Kansas doesn't have the ability to have, a grant writing course for physician scientists in anesthesiology, but maybe it's something we could do on Zoom and have it more widespread. And that way everybody can take advantage of those resources. So things like that, I think, are going to become more and more possible, and are areas where, institutions who have physician scientists who are experts at writing grants or at whatever it is, papers, reviews, study sections, mock study sections, things like that, that they can expand their reach a little bit further.
Thank you. Dr. Adams, how about you?
So sort of echoing that, I think what we need are systems, right? Because all of us have sort of this unique pathway where we overcame the odds, we did our heroic journey, and, we're landed in the funding pool. But, a lot of it is you had to sort of seek things out. And I think, so when I came to Wake Forest, I was one of 3 K awardees that were physicians across the entire institution. And so, I think it's one of those things where I'm a self-starter and I've been looking for ways to solve these problems myself. But I think as a specialty, if we care about this as a priority, we have to do things differently. I know that the Anesthesia Research Council are sort of looking at solutions for this, but I think it also is, how do you sort of engage and build this into our culture? Because right now it's not really part of the culture. There are them and there's us. And, it's not something that really lets that crosswalk work. And I think in terms of us being research people, I think everyone has the capacity for it in some format. And I think even if you don't pursue a funding career, having that type of training allows you to be the person that is clinically effective in terms of your workspace and other things, whether it's clinical administration or business or some other component. These skills in terms of communication, writing, and all that, they're not really prioritized. And there's something where, because we don't, I think, build this into what we do, like say internal medicine, in a lot of these places where they build things in different ways, we have some missed opportunities. And I think looking at it as this is not one institution's problem to solve, I think is the way to really kind of move the whole thing forward.
I think this platform gives us a wonderful opportunity to do just what you're suggesting, to increase awareness and to sort of use platforms such as the AUA to figure out how to go about and do that. How about you, Dr. Bartels? What you've moved around. You went from Hopkins and MGH and are in cornfields, I guess, right? And so what have you done personally to connect with institutions that are historically more endowed and to support your organization?
On a personal level, the mentor who pushed me from K to R is at the University of Michigan, and we meet online. I want to put a plug in for diversity, not just the traditional way to understand it, but in terms of funding the middle class of anesthesia departments. Like the Blue Ridge numbers came just out, and if you're from a giant institution, it's very easy to be number 5. But how are you comparing, to the rest of the endowment that exists and or the rest of the funding that exists at your institution? We will always be smaller here, but relatively speaking, at a place like Nebraska, we have a lot more resources per person interested in research than elsewhere. We have tremendous philanthropy in this area, and if you look at funding rates in anesthesia department, they are sometimes 0 for the smaller and middle departments. That's not the case for the internal medicine departments. I think we are missing an opportunity here, and that is really one of my goals is to grow funding in small and mid-sized departments, because I think actually per person we have a lot more resources to invest, and with Zoom and the ability for hub and spoke mentoring networks, that's really something I think we should be pursuing as AUA, because I think, so to speak, we can really grow our middle class much more than we're doing right now.
What a wonderful way to end this portion of our conversation on that note. Karsten, I think you said it very well. So I'd like to take this opportunity to thank all the panelists for joining, for you to share your journeys and your wisdom and your lessons learned with us today. And the next time we'll connect, we'll be live with our AUA attendees and get to have a Q&A session to continue our conversation. So thank you very much, everyone, and see you in a few weeks. Well, welcome, everyone. Thanks for joining. We hope that you enjoyed the video that we prepared in an interactive format where we had a Q&A session with our panelists around funding and around research careers and mentorship to sort of talk about how to grow anesthesiology research and scientists and programs. And so with that, I'd like to welcome Dr. Meredith Adams, Dr. Andrea Chadwick, and Dr. Vivian Tofik, and Dr. Karsten Bartels, who we introduced during the recorded portion. We'll move to the chat box and take the first question and hope that you will feel comfortable to turn your videos on. There's only 23 people here. Feel free to post your questions in the chat box, make your comments, and also just raise your hand. We can sort of monitor the field and make this more of an interactive and personal conversation. So we'll launch with the first question, which is, given the low funding rates and how long it takes to write grants, such as R01s, is it realistic to think that clinician scientists can be successful? I really like this question because I think it's the reality. You know, I think funding rates are something to be thought about. I'm interested in hearing from our panelists whether it's realistic to think that we in the specialty can be successful, and perhaps extend that question a little bit and ask each of you to comment on how clinician scientists can be successful given the funding rates that they exist. And maybe we'll begin with Dr. Tofik.
Thank you. Yeah, so I mean, I think actually we're in a good position because I think we can be a little bit creative when we're writing grants. We have an exposure and an expertise as physician scientists that researchers who are don't have patient care responsibilities don't necessarily have that additional area of knowledge. And so I think it's actually really come down to like being a little bit creative, and also just like dealing with failure and throwing in as many as you need to make one stick. I mean, I apply for every grant I can find that sort of fits what I'm working on, and I just use every opportunity, you know, in grant review to get feedback and make the grants better. And I know there's all these like war stories of study sections just writing terrible reviews, but I've had some study sections actually give really constructive feedback that we've used to improve our work and improve our grants and get us funding. So I think it's challenging, but I think, you know, the low funding rates affect everybody, not just physician scientists, but, you know, straight researchers as well. So I think that there's a little bit of creativity, thinking more broadly than just NIH. I mean, just on this panel, we have funding from many different groups, DARPA, PCORI, NIH, private foundations, philanthropy, others. And we talked about that a little bit and had on our slides of introduction. So I think thinking broadly about where funding can come from and thinking creatively about the type of projects that we want to engage in.
So let's, so I'll sort of extend that conversation a little bit further and maybe ask Dr. Chadwick to answer this question, which is, so Dr. Tofik just mentioned we should be creative. Can you share some of your thoughts about how you think we as anesthesiologists can be creative as we think about funded work? We have a traditional model of basic science, and that's great, very important to do discovery work. Are there other opportunities to think about research?
Absolutely. I mean, I think when you look at what creativity is, it's taking, you know, what you're interested in, trying to adapt it to the world, right? And figure out where can I be relevant with what I'm interested in doing. I think we're very uniquely poised with certain funding strategies, especially those of us who may do pain research or opioid related research. We know that there's a significant amount of money through the HEAL initiative and other funding strategies that, you know, if you maybe have something that's kind of like that, you can always morph it to fit these RFAs, just like Vivian said. I think that creativity helps you kind of expand your potential world for performing research, the potential areas for collaborations. And I think the concept of team science, especially in the perioperative setting, is really important. So we have this unique ability as anesthesiologists to have our foot in a variety of different areas within the perioperative and even chronic pain or chronic experience for patients. And so that idea for team science and having those creative teams that can be built to pursue research within that area, I think is very important that we look at in terms of where we move forward in the future.
Thank you. I think we have a raised hand. Ben Palanca, did you have a comment you wanted to share with us?
I think Liz had, I don't want to jump in front of Liz. Liz had a question posted in chat. I'm happy to ask mine after her.
I was actually hoping to wait to ask that question until this theme finished.
Okay, perfect.
Creativity, if that's okay.
Okay, perfect. You mentioned study sections recently, and I started thinking about, is there something that we can do for our colleagues in terms of getting them on study sections represented in that critical area where we can become better grant writers and then serve as mentors for those whose hands we're holding and helping to pull up in their career. Any thoughts on that?
I mean, I can just tell you like my own personal story, which is, you know, it's really reliant on the generosity of senior mentors. And I had an incredible experience where I was invited to give, visiting professor talk at University of Iowa. And I met with a faculty member there who I didn't know, but had sat on a study section that one of my grants went through. And she said to me, you're an assistant professor, ever been on study section? And I said, no. And she said, you should be on study section. Why haven't you been on study section? And I was like, I don't know. I'm not trying to answer that. She's like, I'm getting you on study section. And that moment, she fired off an email to the SRO for her particular study section, of which she was the chair. And she said, this is Dr. Tofik. She's great. She writes great, you know. And then I was invited to be on study section. And it was a fantastic experience. I really have to say I learned so much from that and have been invited back and now served on a couple of study sections. So I think it really is, you know, some people just do it themselves. They'll just look at a study section they're interested in, email the SRO, and I think that's totally appropriate. But I do think that especially those who are in chair positions of study sections or are standing members of study sections should be reaching out to people at the, you know, assistant professor or junior faculty level and really engaging and getting us involved, because it makes a huge difference to be able to be at the table and listen to the comments as they're being made.
I would agree with that, Vivian. I think, that was my experience too. And it was, in fact, the person who nominated me was not even in anesthesiology. It was somebody in pediatrics who said, I think you really need to look into this. And I started reviewing K awards for NICHD. And I remember my first review of the K application, where I was the second reviewer. The first reviewer was the inventor of ECMO. And I know that my review differed from that person. And I was so insecure in terms of, the comments that I made and the things that I said. But it was a wonderful experience. And I think half of what I said wasn't probably correct at the time looking back. But it's really a wonderful opportunity, and anyone can really nominate folks. So if any of you who's on the call and you can see who else is on the call here, if you're interested in being nominated to study section, please reach out to us. I'm sure most of us would be happy to sort of make that connection for folks. Okay, so I think the second question that was posted, and I think there are chairs on this call who I might call on actually to participate, because they would know better, if you will. So are there data on how differential policies made at the department level, example, salary parity for researchers, affect retention of clinician scientists? And this is related to a comment from Jamie Pravratsky, who talks about this issue affecting anesthesiologists more than internists. How do we offset this challenge? And Marge Sedensky posts, we're very expensive. And so even with funding trainees, this is a huge investment by any department. So I'll just take a pause here. And I saw Janine Wiener-Kronisch on the call, and I see Adam Saperstein from Hopkins. So if both of you would be so kind as to turn on your videos or try to provide some input and guidance to this question, that would be great. So maybe I'll start with Dr. Wiener-Kronisch.
Well, this is the problem, right? If you're in a big department that has a lot of funding, you can support researchers the same way you support clinicians. I mean, American medicine supports clinical medicine. It doesn't really support research in the same way. So my thought is that, just as we heard before, we need to help train people at other institutions, the institutions that have the funding, and sort of use other institutions as sites for research so we can extend knowledge and benefits from grants, and hopefully in that manner get people started where there isn't so much money to support research.
Thank you. Dr. Saperstein, how about you from the great institution of Hopkins?
Well, thank you for that, Monica. And, you know, I'm going to go back to, and thanks for the panel, which has been outstanding. Something that Karsten said. One way of looking at this is sort of what the per capita spending is. And I've been really impressed today in the poster sessions at how widely distributed the research is in a number of institutions. And so I think that that's a point. And the other point that was made in the previous part of this session was that, you know, the metrics are grants and publications. And again, the publications are pretty widely dispersed. So I'm pretty encouraged by the health of the community in research, and it's represented on this panel. I don't think that we're cornering the market in the traditional blue chip programs. I think that it's pretty widely distributed, and that some of the numbers are skewed by selective large grants. If you look at Blue Ridge rankings. So I think you really need to do it, like with most things in anesthesia finance, you really need to do a deep dive to understand the health. The other thing that I think Meredith pointed out earlier was a comparison to departments of medicine. And one of the questions points out, two of the comments in the chat point things out that are interesting. The amount of support you need for junior faculty to develop is large, even though it doesn't seem large to the individual. And large departments have more people who want that. So the per capita part comes in again. And then there's a fundamental difference between how medicine finances and how we finance. So there's our large base salaries, which are always at issue in a competition against our academics. But also it's the fact that medicine does the 3 years of medicine and then 3 years of fellowship, which is the fellowship is sponsored by the PI's grants. It's a fundamentally different model, which we attack differently. And I think we've done pretty well, but going forward, it always remains a challenge.
Thank you. So in fact, many departments of surgery, neurosurgery will not support K award applications for that very reason, even though NIH has reduced the required amount of non-clinical time that they need to spend on research. So for a number of surgical specialties, it's 50% as opposed to 75% non-clinical time. But despite that, that is still a challenge. Dr. Bartels made a very interesting comment to me during one of our conversations over the past month, which is, you know, institutions that are hungry to develop research may actually make more of an investment in research. And so my question to this group really is it worthwhile thinking about really focusing on institutions that have not historically been Blue Ridge or Tier 1 to really grow anesthesiology research? So Dr. Bartels, do you think, like your place, for example, how hungry is the University of Nebraska and what investments have they made to sort of really make that point?
Well, I think, we're in a fortunate situation. We have a lot of, private donations. We have a $10 million endowment for research, which is a lot for a small department. And
But what I think is important that where I think we can turn the dial a little bit is on the study sections that give away our career development grants for our as fair, for example. I see some names on there that have been on there since I applied for them 10 years ago. And I think that's an area where we need to have more diversity, institutional diversity, and also I would say diversity from a perspective of career stage. I think it's really important to support people, from a variety of different institutions, which are productive, regardless if they have, the stamp of a, top 10 NIH funding Blue Ridge place.
Thank you. So I've been told we have 3 minutes for our session to end, but this is a wonderful conversation. There's a 10-minute grace period, so I'm going to move forward. Dr. Lisko, could you say hello and ask your question, please?
Yeah, sure. It's actually more of a comment. I'm actually the chair at Nebraska, for those of you who don't know me, although several on this panel do. So to your comment about being hungry, I've been chair now for 10 years at Nebraska. We came with no NIH funding in the department. We now have, how many, Karsten? 5 R-level funded PIs in the department. As Karsten mentioned, we have a $10 million research endowment in the department, and we use that for startup funding for many of our junior investigators. And that really came to fruition about 2 years ago. The University of Nebraska is very interested in expanding research funding in the clinical departments, and the dean has established what's called a Dean's Development and Innovation Fund that can help defray the costs when a clinician goes into the research world, even though the NIH grants obviously don't fully fund the salaries. That can be utilized as a backstop if the department doesn't have additional funds to do it. And I think Karsten in the recorded session brought out the point that, sometimes the smaller departments on a per capita basis can invest more heavily in those individuals. And so, in this world of electronics, it may be better for a junior investigator to look at a less classically funded institution, but one that perhaps is well resourced and achieve their mentorship via long distance. So I just wanted to add that to the conversation because so many of you are from larger institutions, with the exception of Andrea, that are not usually swimming in these waters. So thanks for giving me the time to speak.
Absolutely. Thank you for joining.
I'll just pitch in. So my primary mentor on my K is at the University of Michigan. So I was the first NIH grant in the history of my department. So I totally echo the idea of long distance mentorship and engaging with those institutions that are a bit more historically well-funded to be able to grow your program. And I encourage any of you who are maybe at the smaller programs to not give up on your goal of becoming an NIH funded or other mechanism funded scientist. Honestly, it's been a fairly awesome process for me here at Kansas.
Thank you, and congratulations to you, Andrea. Dr. Pravetsky, you have a question or comment?
Yeah, it was just to kind of dovetail off the last couple comments. I mean, I think, great, these are great ideas, and Dr. Chadwick, it's awesome you've been able to do that and the NIH supported it. My comment before you actually got on was going to be, I know traditionally people that have remote mentors, NIH has not always looked on favorably. And, as a clinician scientist, you might be able to get away with that. I'm just wondering, for basic scientists, obviously that's probably not as feasible. But, I know that that's only a portion of it, but I do think that that is an interesting model to potentially look for in the future, but it would probably only benefit more translational clinician type of scientists. So more of a comment / question, but.
So I understand what you're saying. I do think the pandemic and our use of virtual platforms has really extended the conversation around virtual mentoring. I have seen, having chaired SAT study section, I have seen successful applications where folks have proposed remote mentoring as a part of their mentoring plan for a particular specific portion, with some in-person visits back and forth to learn certain methods and techniques on animal models. So I think that then that remote mentor comes and is part of the oversight process for the basic scientists trying to do some work. Now, obviously, East-West Coast collaborations can be more challenging, so proximity does help. But I do think that the needle may be moving a little bit on the remoteness. Great. Any other questions or comments?
I just wanted to say, as someone who my innovation is not that I am writing new crazy methodological things for machine learning and natural language processing. I'm taking a lot of established things and then applying them to our scientific problems. And I think when you have that type of work, you really have to weave together a tapestry of people. And, I think that's really where that mentorship can be sort of locally diffuse. In my scenario, it wasn't there was ever one person sort of guiding where I went with things, but more I went out to the experts and say, can you help me with this? Can you help me with this? And then have a really defined plan of how each person's going to take you over the finish line for that particular task. And I think it echoes really what people need in terms of mentorship and sponsorship anyway, in the sense that one person should not be your everything. That's an unreasonable expectation. So sometimes those people live close by, sometimes those people are far away. And I think the world has gotten a lot smaller in many ways in the last couple of years in a way that's very functional. And I think people are open to that as well. But I think, as someone who has put in 3 grants the last 8 weeks, sometimes you just got to throw crazy stuff at the wall and see what happens. And you got to get a little scrappy, you got a little crazy, and just really see, what they say. And then they'll tell you if they like it or they don't. And you can revise, and every failed grant is the foundation for your next successful grant. Like, it's just adapting, shifting, and building towards the next thing. This failure is the brick that builds the road to the success.
Thank you. Ben, did you want to make a final comment with us today, or was your hand up from the last question? Okay. Well, with that, I think our time together has come to an end. I'd like to really thank Karsten Bartels for introducing this idea for a panel today, and to all the panelists who really did a wonderful job. And thank you, everyone. Have a wonderful weekend and rest of the AUA meeting.
Thank you. Thanks, Monica.